Something that has something that's come to mind lately. I kind of wanted to talk about, especially in light of Pope Leo's latest apostolic exhortation, um, which is essentially on the love of the poor and on the sort of moral dangers of wealth and that sort of thing. It's interesting, I think, that at least in today's age, in our particular social context, I think we see a few commonalities in the grave temptations of the extremely wealthy. Now, of course, this isn't to necessarily condemn wealth as such, blah blah blah, that whole shebang. But I will say though, I think that this is there's an interesting, let's say, collection of temptations that coincide. Now, the obvious one, of course, is greed, right? But we can set that aside. That's the least interesting, because I think that goes almost without saying, as a serious temptation to those with extreme wealth. But then, slightly more interesting is the sin of pride. But I've talked about that a lot, and a lot of people have talked about that to no end. The one that's been sticking in my mind lately, which doesn't get the discussion that it needs, is the temptation to sloth. Now, we might think that what I mean by that is, well, it's the temptation to just simply live off the wealth that you have accrued and to not do anything further with it and to just sort of coast on by. Okay, fine, but that's hardly sinful, really. If you have a gratuitous amount of wealth and you're just sitting there with it, I mean, it's not sinful to not increase it, really. What is sinful is what you do or don't do with it. Now, why I accuse a lot of the richest people in our society of sloth, or at least probably, accuse is maybe too strong a word, but suspect, let's say, based on their actions and expressed attitudes, is that we have to remember what sloth traditionally means in the scholastic natural law tradition. Sloth is not just laziness. It is not a lack of work. Sloth is despair at spiritual good. It is giving up on the goods of God and of faith. It is contrary not to prudence, but to hope. The sort of corresponding vice to sloth is hope. It's the giving up of the hope that we should have in God. That's ultimately what sloth amounts to. This is most commonly, this takes the form of a sort of giving up, of not wanting to persevere any longer in the difficulty of especially the spiritual life, but really the goods of this, even of this life. Okay. Why do I say that this applies, I think, or might apply, to a great many of the extremely wealthy today in our society? Well, it's because, for the same reason that I think that they are largely susceptible to pride, and these two tend to run together in this impulse, which is the impulse to use a technical term, to try to immanentize the eschaton. The eschaton being the end state of the world. Not the world coming to an end, but how the world ultimately ought to be when it is perfected and restored by God in the end times. Immanentizing that is to try to bring that into being now through our own efforts, through our own will, rather than by God's will, by God's plan, in God's time. It's another, maybe more vernacular way of putting it is trying to build heaven on earth. Key examples of this, of course, would be the various aspects of social planning that go into the more left-wing variety of ultra-rich people, the World Economic Forum types, the Bill Gates types, all the attempting to craft a meticulously perfect society under their ultimate control. Again, you can say this is because of pride, that they think that they themselves are worthy of creating this thing. They are the only ones capable of doing this, and so they put themselves above God. But also, it is a despair at providence. He's saying, well, the world is going to hell, and so it is my job, with my spectacular wealth and gifts, my job to build heaven here instead. Now, the opposite side of this that we often see is also the dramatic fear of death that we see among a lot of the wealthy. The attempt to indefinitely lengthen our biological lives, which we actually see again commonly among spectacularly wealthy people. Jeff Bezos is a perfect example of this, but we also see this in a lot of the tech billionaires. People like Elon Musk, Peter Thiel, a lot of them will express this desire to transcend mere humanity, to extend life beyond the natural course, or even to sort of digitize life. We see this once in a while, less often, but we see it. Jeff Bezos is utterly terrified of death and is essentially obsessed with curing it, which is, we should know, impossible. But a lot of this comes down to not just a fear of death, because we should fear death to some degree. It is the cessation of our earthly lives, but we should not fear death ultimately. Right? Christ took away that fear. And to maintain a fear of death in the face of the promises of Christ is to reject those promises. And that is a kind of sloth, the despair at the hope that Christ should give us. To want to extend this life, this corporeal and biological life, indefinitely, and is essentially to assume that this life is all there is. And that's not true, right? We ought to know that. And a lot of them are not even, atheists, right? If they were atheists, then maybe you could understand or forgive that somewhat, but they're not, right? A lot of these people are if not Catholics, a lot of them are professing Christians, and even those who are not are some kind of supernaturalists, even if that's some kind of esoteric voodoo. There's still it's still not simply a delusion that, well, the material is all that there is or anything like that. No. It really is a kind of sloth. It's kind of despair in the face of death, thinking that it's all that there is. And I don't know exactly why excessive wealth seems to bring this temptation to the forefront to a lot of people, because it does seem to. But maybe it is somewhat unique to this society. I don't know if that was classically, historically, a common temptation of the extremely wealthy. Maybe it was, maybe it wasn't. Not sure. Maybe it is tied to pride as well, thinking that I know what's best for the world and God doesn't. But I don't know. It is an interesting commonality. And an interesting reminder, perhaps, that sloth is not necessarily the sin that we most commonly think of it as sort of laziness, because it's not quite it. That's not the it's not the crucial part of sloth.